My boyfriend has a pursuer. That girl isn't good looking and her conditions are average, yet she has persistently liked him for 10 years. At first, he was very annoyed with her and kept telling her to get lost. But later, I saw the note he had saved for her in his phone. He called her, sweetie. Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. While I was being intimate with Paul Booth, his phone suddenly rang. Panting, he lifted his head from my lips, his brows furrowed with impatience, and irritably pulled out the phone from his pocket.
Hello?
I followed his gaze, and it was a string of numbers without a name. But we both knew who it was. Sure enough, he frowned and answered the call, immediately cursing.
What's wrong with you? Can you stop bothering me?
I heard low sobbing from the other end.
Paul, I didn't mean to, but there's a guy following me, and I'm really scared.
Paul paused, glanced at me, and still said irritably.
Why are you calling me? Call the police.
Saying that, he hung up on her crying voice.
Let's continue.
He lowered his head quickly, as if trying to hide something. But between the kisses, I felt his distraction. Clearly, we were kissing, yet his brows were furrowed, as if his body was with me, but his mind was elsewhere. Moments later, the phone rang again. Paul looked at me, then picked up the phone.
Didn't I tell you?
Please, I'm really scared. He's still following me.
Her helpless voice carried a sob, and Paul abruptly stood up, urgently asking.
Where are you?
After hearing something, he stood up, grabbed his coat, and was about to leave. At that moment, he suddenly remembered I was still lying on the bed watching him, and awkwardly turned to me.
Eudora, wait for me a bit. It's late at night, and it's not safe for her to be alone.
Without waiting for my response, he hurried out. I quietly watched the closed door, then slowly pulled up the quilt after a while. How many times has this happened? I can't remember. I've been with Paul Booth for 7 years, and Mabel Hart has been entangled with him for 7 years. When I started dating Paul in high school, I was the top student, and he was second in the grade, sitting behind me, always pulling my braids or poking my back to get my attention. But he would also bring me milk tea and buy me a hot water bottle when I had a stomachache. At the graduation party, Paul walked up to me, and everyone in the class started to cheer. I still remember the redness on his teenage face, but his eyes were filled with stars, shining brightly.
Eudora Walton!
He looked at me, his eyes full of smiles.
I like you. Will you be with me?
When I said yes, everyone laughed, except for Mabel. She cried and ran out, but no one cared. Everyone knew that Mabel liked Paul. When I joked and laughed with Paul, she was always in the corner staring at him. She would buy milk tea for Paul, but he always gave it to me. She would write love letters on scented pink paper and stuff them into Paul's desk. But Paul always tore them up and threw them away. Everyone knew that Paul didn't like Mabel. Because she was really unremarkable. She was very ordinary looking, and her grades were at the bottom, always wearing thick black-rimmed glasses and a loose school uniform, silently folding paper cranes for Paul in the corner. Compared to us, she was really too ordinary. At the time, I thought Mabel Hart was just a minor episode in our love story. Paul was good-looking, and many girls liked him, so I had seen this kind of thing many times. Paul didn't like her, so I thought she would soon give up like the others. But I didn't expect her to entangle Paul for 7 years. From when we were 18 to 25, Mabel clung to Paul like a lingering ghost. She followed us to the same city for college and brought Paul breakfast every day. After graduation, she used connections to find a job and stayed in the same city with us, constantly calling Paul, seeking him out for every little thing. At first, I didn't care. Mabel posed no threat to me. Paul was indeed very annoyed with her. He cursed her, told her to get lost, and blocked her. In the harshest moments, he even scolded her.
Aren't you shameless? I said I don't like you. Can't you understand human language? You're a girl, have some dignity, don't you have any self-respect?
But Mabel didn't care. She still kept coming back time and again. But at some point, everything changed. I turned over and looked at the ceiling. When did it start? Paul stopped blocking Mabel. His attitude was still bad to her, but he answered every call of hers. Now, with just one word from her, he would leave me and rush to her side. I consoled myself, thinking maybe I was overthinking it. Compared to me, Mabel was neither pretty nor outstanding. She hadn't changed since high school, still a freckled girl with glasses, working as an office clerk in a small company, earning $500 a month. While I was a model during university and now a special assistant to the manager of a listed company. I looked at the now cold bedsheet beside me. Paul had left in such a hurry that the sheet was wrinkled. Paul wouldn't like her, would he? I wondered. Paul didn't come back all night. My heart sank slowly in the night until he pushed open the door early the next morning, looking utterly exhausted.
Such a mess.
His one sentence left me speechless. He sat next to me, angrily complaining.
You have no idea, she's just messing with me. What nonsense about someone stalking her. I knew no one would stalk someone like her.
His attitude made me feel slightly relieved. I leaned in and asked.
I think she's really affecting our lives. Can you just ignore her next time?
Paul gave a bitter smile.
I don't want to deal with her either. She keeps changing numbers to call me. It's really unavoidable.
Don't worry, we're getting engaged soon. I'll definitely talk to her and make things clear. She's really annoying.
I nodded, but when I looked down, I saw that Paul was only wearing last night's t-shirt and his jacket was nowhere to be seen.
Where's your jacket?
Oh,
He said nonchalantly.
maybe it was left at her place. I don't want it anymore. I'm too tired to deal with her.
We didn't invite Mabel to our engagement party. No one knew what crazy thing she might do. Because of her, we didn't even dare to post on social media, only privately notifying friends. However, she somehow found out and still came. When Paul and I were welcoming guests at the door, she walked over with a miserable smile.
7 years of dating, and finally, you made it. Congratulations.
She seemed to have put on makeup today, but looked even more dreadful than before. Her eyebrows were thick and black, lips bright red. The spots on her face were covered, but she looked as pale as a ghost, quite horrifying. She was wearing a long white dress, as if she were the bride. The jacket she was wearing looked very familiar. It was Paul's jacket. My smile faded, but I still politely said,
Thank you, and I wish you find your happiness soon.
Mabel didn't respond, just stared straight at Paul. Paul's expression wasn't the usual annoyance but rather a complicated emotion.
What are you doing here?
Don't worry.
Mabel forced a smile.
I just came to have a look. If I can't have you, at least I can give you my blessing.
Her expression was desolate, even Paul couldn't say anything harsh. After she left, my best friend pulled me aside, gloating.
Oh my God, did you see her face? It scared me to death. I really feel sorry for Paul, being pestered by such a person for so long. He must have nightmares.
I tried to smile but couldn't. For some reason, I felt uneasy, as if something was slipping out of my control. I whispered.
Do you think Paul might like Mabel?
His expression earlier made me feel something was off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I felt that Paul's attitude towards Mabel seemed to have changed. Come on, my friend rolled her eyes.
Paul has seen all kinds of beauties. If he likes Mabel, that would be unbelievable. Her. With bow legs and a face full of acne. Don't insult Paul.
I clenched my hands and took a deep breath. Yes, I'm much better than Mabel. I believe Paul will know how to choose. Besides, we've been together for 7 years. Our relationship has gone beyond lovers to family, hard to part. I should trust him. When we went to the classmates' private room to toast, I wore my engagement dress and held Paul's arm, smiling.
Thank you all for coming today. Paul and I have always been grateful for your support.
Not at all. This toast is for you. Wishing you a lifetime of happiness and many children.
A male classmate said with a smile.
Yeah. Paul and Eudora, we've seen them come this far. 7 years of dating, it's not easy, but finally, they're getting married.
A high school female classmate smiled.
Such a perfect couple. Back in school, Paul and Eudora were the stars. So many girls liked Paul, I always wondered who could win him over. Turns out, it was mutual.
You don't know this, a male classmate teased.
Paul liked Eudora long before he confessed. He was so nervous, he asked me for advice.
The room was filled with memories of our relationship, everyone smiling. Only Mabel stood expressionless in the corner, staring at Paul. Paul pretended not to see her, avoiding her gaze, but his smile was somewhat stiff.
Come on, let's raise our glasses to this lovely couple, wishing them everlasting happiness.
The class president raised his glass, and everyone followed. Mabel just stood there, not moving or speaking. The atmosphere became awkward, and the class president quickly reminded her.
Raise your glass, Mabel. What are you doing?
Mabel picked up her glass and drank it all in one go, regardless of the others. She drank so quickly that the wine dribbled down her chin, making her face flush red and bringing tears to her eyes.
Wishing you
Mabel looked at Paul with desperate infatuation, her voice hoarse.
a lifetime of happiness.
She wiped her face and ran out of the door. The room fell silent, the previous joy and celebration vanished, the atmosphere instantly tense. Everyone knew our story, and after a moment, they started to smooth things over.
Mabel might have something to do. Come on, let's drink.
However, Paul beside me was staring at the direction she left, as if he didn't hear the class president. I bit my lip.
Paul?
He snapped back to reality but didn't drink, looking anxious.
I'll go check on her.
He pushed my hand away and hurried out. My rival ran out crying, and my fiancé went after her. In the large private room, I was left standing at the door, feeling awkward and ridiculous. Even the class president couldn't smooth things over this time. Everyone quietly watched me, waiting for my reaction. After a while, I forced a smile.
Everyone, enjoy yourselves.
Before I could finish, my best friend burst through the door, sweating and shouting.
Eudora, come out quickly, Mabel is going to jump off the building.
What was originally a well-organized engagement party descended into chaos, with everyone coming out to watch the commotion. I lifted my long dress and ran up to the rooftop on the 7th floor. Mabel was sitting on the railing, her hair disheveled by the strong wind, and her makeup ruined by tears, making her look even more pitiful. But Paul stood nearby, his fists clenched in anxiety, his face deathly pale.
Mabel, if you have something to say it properly. Come down now.
Mabel glanced at him, letting the wind carry away her tears, and smiled shakily.
Paul, you're engaged now. Are you happy?
Paul didn't respond, just stared at her intensely. The onlookers behind me had already started whispering, but Mabel didn't care at all. She swung her legs, lost in thought.
Paul, I've liked you for 10 years. I liked you since high school. Back then, when the teacher was assigning seats, no boy wanted to sit with me because I was ugly. I stood there feeling so awkward, wishing I could disappear. It was you who said you were willing to sit with me. I wondered at the time, you're so good-looking, so many people like you, why would you want to sit with me? That's when I started liking you.
Paul shouted, come down and then we can talk.
Mabel acted as if she hadn't heard him.
But why did you choose to be with Eudora Walton? Just because she's prettier than me and has better grades? But I'm the one who loves you the most, Paul. I'm the one who loves you more than anyone else in this world. I changed my college preference to follow you to the same college, and then I shamelessly pulled strings to stay here. I thought maybe you'd break up with Eudora, and then you'd notice me. But why did you have to get engaged to her?
My best friend couldn't take it anymore and shouted.
Are you crazy? They're already engaged, and you're still pestering him. Have some shame.
Shut up!
Paul turned and roared. I'd never seen such a terrifying expression on his face. My best friend was stunned, silently looking at me.
Mabel.
He coaxed softly.
Whatever it is, come down and we'll talk, okay?
His voice was so indulgent, sounding both familiar and strange. Mabel smiled slightly, looking at Paul, her white dress billowing in the wind.
Paul, I've liked you for 10 years. My life is all about you now. If I can't be with you, I don't know what meaning my life has left. Now.
She smirked.
I'm giving you a choice. Either be with me and end this engagement. Or.
She gripped the railing, her body leaning back slightly.
Watch me die in front of you. If I can't be with you, then let me be a memory you'll never forget.
The 7th floor isn't very high, but it's still about 20 meters. Falling from here would most likely be fatal. My hands, hanging by my sides, started to tremble. I looked at Paul, begging desperately.
Paul, please, don't.
Paul turned around, a look of guilt crossing his face. After a moment, he spoke.
I'm sorry, Eudora.
Tears streamed down my face as I choked out.
What about me?
Paul lowered his head.
I'm sorry, but I can't just watch her die in front of me.
I broke down, shouting.
Why do you care if she dies? Don't you hate her? We've been together for 7 years. She's cut her wrists, taken sleeping pills, tried to jump off buildings. I've lost count of how many times. Paul Booth, is Mabel the only person who can feel pain and die? Am I not a person too? Do I have to endure living with the 3 of us forever?
Mabel watched my hysterical state, her smile growing even wider. She looked like a triumphant winner, smugly watching the loser's helpless outburst.
Paul, do you really not like me?
She curved her lips, her words chilling.
If you don't like me, then I'll just die.
She made a move to let go.
I like you.
Paul finally couldn't take it anymore and shouted, as if a long-closed valve had burst open, letting all his emotions pour out.
I like you, okay? I've fallen for you. Come down. I won't go through with this engagement. Are you satisfied now?
Our classmates and friends were shocked, whispering among themselves, watching the drama unfold. But Mabel laughed, tears in her eyes, reaching out to Paul. Paul didn't hesitate to walk over and grab her hand. She jumped down and, holding Paul's hand, they ran into the stairwell. Paul didn't hesitate either, and soon they disappeared from our sight. The wind on the rooftop was strong, and there were many people. We had invited a lot of friends and classmates today, and dozens of people were gathered here, each with different expressions. I felt like I couldn't stand the stares from these people. I wanted to leave but felt rooted to the spot, unable to move. After a while, everyone started to feel awkward and found excuses to leave. Only my best friend stayed, worried.
Eudora, are you okay? Don't be upset. Paul might just be too kind-hearted to let Mabel die. He didn't mean anything else.
I spoke softly.
You go ahead. I want to be alone for a while. All right?
She bit her lip.
Don't do anything rash. I'll be downstairs. Call me if you need anything.
Now there was no one left on the rooftop, only me standing in the wind. Strangely, I didn't feel heartbroken. Maybe I had anticipated this outcome long ago. I just felt an emptiness inside, a hollowness that the wind seemed to blow right through. I stood on the rooftop for a long time, letting the wind blow until my hands and feet were numb with cold before I slowly went back down. A waiter hurried over and said,
Miss, your husband's phone was left here.
I turned my dry eyes downwards, my gaze falling on the dark blue iPhone.
All right, thank you.
In all the years I had been with Paul, I rarely looked at his phone. We had been together for so long that we trusted each other like family. But now, I really wanted to see what was in his phone. I opened his phone and saw only one pinned chat, and it wasn't me. The profile had a note that said "Sweet Troublemaker," a nickname filled with affection. I recognized the profile picture. It was Mabel Hart. All the surrounding sounds disappeared as I trembled and tapped on the chat. The chat history was long, so long that I couldn't scroll to the beginning. The earliest date was from last year, and back then, Paul's attitude towards Mabel was still very harsh. His first message was,
Can you stop calling me? I've already told you, I have a girlfriend, and I only like her. There's no chance between us, do you understand?
Mabel replied.
But I just like you.
Paul angrily responded.
Are you crazy?
After that, there was no reply from Paul for a long time, and it was all Mabel's one-sided sharing of her life.
Today, I saw a little black cat on my way to work. Its eyes were beautiful, but not as beautiful as yours. Our supervisor is so annoying, always picking on me, and yet they pay us so little. The photos my colleague took at Disneyland are so nice. I wish I could go there with you.
This went on for a year, and Paul never replied. I knew why he didn't block Mabel. Because if he did, she would just use another number to add him again and again. It was easier to let her talk to herself. But after a year, things started to change. On the first day back after New Year's, Mabel sent him a message.
I think I have pneumonia. It's pretty serious. The doctor said I need to be hospitalized, but I don't have enough money, so I'll just go home.
10 minutes later, Paul replied.
Are you out of your mind? How can you ignore pneumonia? How much do you need?
For the first time, he responded to her, and Mabel was overjoyed.
6,000. Are you going to lend it to me?
Paul didn't say much, just directly transferred $6,000 to her. Looking at the timeline, I suddenly remembered that at the beginning of the year, Paul told me that he made a mistake at work that month and lost $6,000 in performance bonuses. At that time, we had a joint account where we both deposited our salaries and spent together. I comforted him, saying it was okay, everyone makes mistakes, just consider it paying for peace of mind. Paul had stared at me for a long time then, and then silently hugged me, not letting go for a long time. I thought he appreciated my understanding. Now I realize he was just feeling guilty. My fingers lost their warmth, and it took a long time before I could continue scrolling. It seemed that because she got a response, Mabel started to share even more. From changing jobs and moving to what she ate that day, she shared everything with Paul. Paul's replies were few, but even a rare reply could make her ecstatic. Gradually, Paul's replies became more frequent. When Mabel reminded him,
It's snowing today, wear more clothes.
Paul replied,
You too.
Mabel.
My salary got docked again this month. The supervisor is so annoying, really has it in for me.
Paul directly transferred $5,000 to her.
If you're out of money, just say so. Stop eating instant noodles all the time.
Mabel.
I really want to go to Disneyland. Will you go with me?
Paul.
I'm busy these days, maybe later.
Later, he even started to show concern for her proactively.
Is your supervisor still giving you a hard time? I have a referral spot here. Why don't you come work for me? Have you bought clothes for the new year? I'll take you shopping. Did you buy your return ticket? Stop being so careless like before, or you won't be able to come back. Eat properly. Is your stomach hurting again?
As I looked at the chat history, my vision gradually blurred. He used to care for me like this too. When did we start to communicate less? It wasn't that he didn't want to share anymore, he just had someone else he wanted to share with more. Over the past 10 years, Mabel had slowly but surely wormed her way into Paul's heart. There were many people in the hotel lobby, but the chat history had drained all my strength, and I could no longer stand. A dull pain pulled at my heart, and I slowly squatted down, covering my face as I cried silently. In that moment, I understood everything. No wonder he was always so impatient with Mabel in front of me, yet always indulged her every whim. No wonder when Mabel said she wanted to take her own life, he left me without hesitation to be with her. It wasn't that he had no choice, he just couldn't bear to see her sad. He had already fallen for her. How could this be? I cried almost to the point of breaking down. After so many years together, how could Paul betray me? He actually fell in love with her. Then what am I? Just a fool in this 10-year-long love story? By the time I got home, it was already late. My eyes were swollen as I stumbled home like a walking corpse. Paul was already back, sitting silently on the sofa. He looked up at me, his gaze complicated, wanting to speak but hesitating.
Eudora,
He wanted to explain, but I didn't listen. I threw the phone at him. Seeing the phone, he understood everything.
Eudora, I'm sorry. I really did hate her at first.
He said, lowering his head.
But she kept pestering me, and over time, I got used to it. Sometimes when she didn't message me, I felt like something was missing.
He didn't finish, and I interrupted him with a sneer. Because I had just cried, my voice was still thick with nasal congestion.
Paul Booth, are you going to tell me your love story? Spare me. This is enough.
I wiped away my tears and hoarsely said,
You just want to break up, right? I'll make it easy for you.
I wanted to say something harsh, but the tears wouldn't stop, making me feel utterly humiliated. Paul stood up and looked at me, his expression pained. After a moment, he softly said,
I'm sorry, Eudora. It's my fault.
Get out.
I closed my eyes, hot tears streaming down my cheeks. Paul's things were already packed. He had come back just to break up with me. He didn't have much, leaving behind everything I had bought for him, dragging a small suitcase as he closed the door behind him. The sound of the door closing was heavy, and I couldn't hold it in anymore, collapsing against the wall and crying my heart out. It hurt too much. In these 7 years, I never doubted that we would be together. In all my future plans, Paul was there. I imagined marrying him, having children with him, growing old together. I always thought he felt the same, but I didn't realize his heart had long since wandered. In this love triangle, I was the only one who lost completely. Mabel's 10-year crush finally came true, and she was so happy that she wanted to announce it to the world. She almost couldn't wait to post a photo of the two of them together. In the photo, they were looking at each other. One was handsome, the other ugly, yet there was a strange harmony, probably because there was deep affection in both their eyes.
Time will tell you who that person really is,
She said. Mabel went to work at Paul's company. They went to Disney together, kissed in front of the castle, and embraced intimately in the hotel. Paul took her to look at wedding dresses. Whether it was a coincidence or not, Mabel chose the same shop I had previously selected, even picking the exact dress I had my eyes on. Her social media looked like a love diary, telling everyone about their passionate love that had been delayed for 10 years. I watched it all with a blank expression for a while, then deleted and blocked them both. These 7 years, let's just say it was a dream I had. But the aftermath of this dream was intense. When a lover of 7 years betrays you, it's a deeper pain than a breakup. Especially since the one he betrayed me with is Mabel, a woman I always thought was ugly and useless, which added a layer of self-doubt to my pain. I lost all my confidence and began to doubt if I was really as good as I always thought. If I was truly better than Mabel, then why did Paul abandon me for her? It was a difficult process to get over. We had been together for so long, visited so many places, and shared so many life experiences. The movies we watched together, the songs we listened to, the flower shop at the street corner where he once bought me flowers. Every little thing was tearing at my broken heart. I went to the cinema alone to watch X-Files 3. At first, I laughed like an idiot, then I cried like an idiot. I didn't know what was wrong with me, my heart seemed to have a mind of its own, hurting so much. But I was powerless, I could only wait for the wound to heal on its own. The next time I saw Paul was downstairs at the company. Back then, to be closer and make commuting easier, we chose 2 companies next to each other. Now I regret it. On my way to work, I hurried downstairs only to see Paul opening the car door for Mabel. When she saw me, Mabel smiled, but that smile looked provocative no matter how I saw it.
Eudora, we're getting married. We'll send you an invitation, you must come. Oh, by the way, you're still single, right? Do you need me to introduce someone to you?
I gave her a cold glance and said nothing. Paul looked a bit embarrassed, tugged at her.
Enough.
He avoided my gaze.
Sorry.
What's there to be sorry about?
Mabel frowned.
You weren't married, I wasn't married, are breakups not allowed? Feelings can't be forced. Paul, what's there to be sorry about? What do you mean?
Her voice grew louder, and many colleagues around turned to look. Paul's face turned red.
Fine, I said the wrong thing, okay? We're going to be late, let's go.
He dragged her away quickly as if escaping. Mabel didn't forget to turn back and wave at me, shouting,
Don't forget, you must come to our wedding.
I clenched my fists, and after a while, I turned and left. A few days later, I suddenly received a call. It was Paul's grandmother. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Paul had taken me home to meet his family early on. Although he was a jerk, his family treated me very well. Especially his grandmother, who liked me very much as her future granddaughter-in-law. Every time I visited, she would give me a big red envelope, and every year she would give me New Year's money. When I was leaving, she always reluctantly held my hand.
Eudora, you're too skinny, go home and eat well. Girls with a bit of weight are more blessed.
Then she would pack all the free-range eggs and ducks for me, and even kill a few chickens to take with me.
Go back and nourish yourself well, these are all free-range, very nutritious.
She would watch the weather forecast for our city and often call me.
It will rain tomorrow, Eudora, remember to bring an umbrella when you go out. It's going to snow these days, Eudora, I bought you a thick down jacket. I don't know how to send it, so I asked your aunt to send it to you. Eudora, when will you come back? The goose I raised is ready, just waiting for you to come back and eat it.
This old lady treated me like her own granddaughter. I hesitated and said,
Grandma?
Grandma's voice was no longer as strong as before, much weaker.
Eudora, did you and that rascal Paul break up?
She asked cautiously. I don't know why, even though I hadn't cried for many days, her question made my eyes well up.
Grandma.
I said softly.
Yes, he fell in love with someone else.
Grandma was silent for a moment, then sighed heavily, sounding very sad.
That rascal, it's his loss, that little bastard. Eudora, you're a good child, your blessings are still ahead.
I closed my eyes and choked out.
MM.
After talking for a while, Grandma reluctantly hung up the phone, and Paul's call came right after. I frowned.
Hello?
Paul was silent for a moment, then said with some difficulty.
Eudora, Grandma's health is not good. The doctor said it's just a matter of days. She really wants to see you one last time but is too embarrassed to say it. Can you go see her?
Hearing his voice again, my first instinct was to refuse. I didn't want to have anything to do with Paul anymore. But the words stuck on my tongue for a long time, unable to come out. I kept seeing Grandma's hand tightly holding mine every time I left, saying earnestly,
When will you come back next time? Don't be stingy with money when you're out, ask for money from home if you need it, don't suffer.
I was deeply conflicted. Paul's voice had a hint of a sob.
Eudora, I know I wronged you, but Grandma always liked you. Please, don't let her leave with regrets.
Did you tell Mabel about this?
I asked softly. I didn't want to cause trouble. Given Mabel's feelings for Paul, who knows what she'd do if she found out Paul was taking me to his house?
She knows.
Paul's voice was a bit evasive.
I told her.
Okay.
I sighed.
But I won't go with you, I'll drive myself.
I hung up the phone. The next morning, I drove into that familiar village. As soon as I entered, Mr. and Mrs. Booth were there to welcome me with smiles, though they seemed a bit forced. Mr. Booth tried to appear relaxed.
Grandma is in that room. Eudora, you should go see her. She's been thinking about you.
When I entered the room, Paul was already kneeling by the bedside, holding Grandma's hand, his eyes red.
You're here?
He turned his head, his voice hoarse.
Grandma has been talking about you.
My nose tingled, and I walked over softly.
Grandma, it's me, Eudora. I'm here.
The last time I saw Grandma, she was still a fashionable old lady, with her hair dyed black, insisting on cooking a big goose for me. Now, her hair was all gray. Grandma's eyes were cloudy, and she was confused. She reached out and grabbed me.
Eudora, is that you? Have you eaten? Yes, I have. You've lost weight, you must not be eating well outside.
Grandma weakly said.
We saved all the homegrown eggs for you, remember to eat them.
I couldn't hold back anymore and choked up.
Take care of your health. Grandma wants to see you have a big, healthy baby. It would be great if the baby looks like Eudora, so pretty.
Grandma had forgotten about our breakup, her breathing was labored, like a leaking bellows.
When do you plan to have a child?
I wiped my tears, unable to speak. Paul, crying, said,
Very soon, Grandma. You'll see your great-grandchild this year. Just hold on a little longer.
Grandma smiled contentedly, about to speak, when suddenly a sinister voice came from behind.
You're planning to have a child? Why don't I know about this?
I was startled and turned around in shock. Mabel was standing at the door in a black down jacket, looking bulky and sullen, like a grim reaper. She sneered.
Paul, what does this mean?
Mr. and Mrs. Booth hurried over, looking embarrassed.
Paul, this young lady says she's your girlfriend. Let me explain.
Paul's face changed drastically, and he was about to stand up. But Mabel didn't give him a chance to explain. Suddenly furious, she came up and slapped him hard. Slap! The loud sound of the slap echoed in the room, stunning everyone.
Paul Booth.
Her voice was like nails on a chalkboard, piercing and unpleasant, filled with suppressed madness.
You actually brought this woman home behind my back.
Paul anxiously said.
Listen to me, there's nothing between us. Grandma just wanted to see Eudora. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to overthink.
But Mabel wouldn't listen at all.
I gave up my ideal college and chose your college just to be in the same city as you. After graduation, I didn't go home all to be with you. For 10 years, I've cooked for you, washed your clothes, never dated anyone else, always waiting for you. For you, I've cut my wrists, jumped off buildings, clung to you like a dog without dignity, and this is how you treat me.
I was stunned. All these years, I thought Mabel was willingly chasing after Paul, but I didn't know she harbored so much resentment. I also didn't know that Paul brought me back without telling Mabel. Paul, however, was not moved, his face full of suppressed irritation.
You've said this 100 times. But damn it, I didn't force you. If you don't want to, you can leave.
This sentence seemed to poke a hornet's nest, and Mabel exploded instantly, veins bulging on her forehead. She screamed.
Paul Booth, you bastard. I tell you, you owe me for life. If you dare betray me, I'll kill you.
She then started to crazily hit Paul. With Grandma behind us, I worriedly tried to intervene, but Mabel redirected her fury at me.
You shameless woman.
She gritted her teeth, her face twisted, her triangular eyes raised high, looking vicious.
It's all your fault, you seduced him. Don't you have any shame? I'll tear your face off. Why don't you just die?
I never expected Mabel to be like this. I used to think she was just too persistent in chasing Paul, but I didn't know her one-sided efforts had suppressed her so much. She looked like a madwoman. Mabel reached out to hit me, and Mr. and Mrs. Booth hurried to intervene. Mabel was very strong, and Mrs. Booth, a frail woman, was slapped and stumbled to the ground, crying out in pain. At this, Paul got angry, his eyes red. He slapped Mabel hard, roaring.
Have you had enough?
No, I haven't.
This slap only fueled Mabel's rage, and she almost fought Paul to the death. Behind us, Grandma was terrified, trying to speak but unable to, her face turning purple. I glanced over, terrified, breaking into a cold sweat.
Stop fighting, stop. Grandma seems to be in trouble, call 911.
It happened to be snowing that day, and 911 took a while to arrive. When the paramedics carried Grandma to the ambulance, she was already in dire condition, clutching my hand, tears streaming down. Behind, Mabel was still clinging to Paul, relentless. Paul wanted to check on Grandma, but she held him back. I cried uncontrollably, holding her hand tightly.
Grandma, don't worry about me. I'll take care of myself.
She finally let go and was carried into the ambulance. 5 minutes later, Grandma lost her heartbeat forever in the ambulance. Because of the incident where Paul's grandmother was angered to death, Paul and Mabel had a complete fallout. Just 2 months ago, they were inseparable, constantly posting on social media every day. During a work break, my friend sent me a message.
Hey, did you know Mabel and Paul are fighting?
I could almost see her gloating expression through the screen. Before I could reply, she sent another string of messages.
You don't know, Mabel seems to have some mental issues. Her personality is extremely twisted, and she has a strong possessiveness. When they first got together, everything seemed normal. But soon after, she started treating Paul like a grandson.
Whenever he worked overtime or had a meal, she would call him incessantly, scaring him to death.
Once, when our classmates came to visit, Paul invited them for dinner. That night, Mabel called him 17 times to urge him to go back. Paul felt embarrassed and turned off his phone, but she had installed a tracker on his phone and came straight over.
I wouldn't have believed it before, but after the last incident, nothing Mabel does surprises me anymore. I asked curiously.
And then? Then she caused a scene. I heard she slapped Paul, saying he betrayed her. She claimed she had given so much, and Paul's conscience had been fed to the dogs. She even threatened to die together if he dared to wrong her. It was terrifying. Oh, and she also scolded that male classmate, saying he was a bad influence on Paul. She warned him not to contact Paul again.
I frowned. This indeed sounded like something Mabel would do. It seems her obsession over the years has twisted her mindset. If Paul didn't stay with her, it might have been okay. But once they got together, she exploded. She would think, I love you so much and have given so much for you. If you dare not to listen to me, you are betraying me, which is already a psychological problem. But the tighter you hold, the more you lose. This kind of relationship is just mutual torment. The more she causes trouble, the further Paul is pushed away. But the more Paul distances her, the more Mabel feels wronged and uses even crazier methods to force him to submit, creating a vicious cycle. Paul won't be able to endure this for long.
Our classmate was furious after being scolded out of nowhere and complained to a few friends in private. Anyway, Paul's reputation is already ruined. Neither colleagues nor friends dare to contact him, fearing they will be scolded. Isn't this karma? Who told him to be so blind back then? He brought this upon himself.
I was about to type when a colleague suddenly exclaimed,
"Oh my God, is someone jumping off the building across the street?"
Following her gaze, I saw someone standing on the rooftop of the building opposite. I couldn't see clearly, but I immediately recognized who it was. Mabel Hart. I was shocked and quickly stood up.
"Let's go, hurry, and check it out."
My colleague dragged me outside. As soon as we went out, we saw a crowd gathered downstairs, everyone watching the commotion and sharing information regardless of whether they knew each other.
"I heard it's a breakup." The guy wants to break up, but the girl doesn't agree, so she's threatening to jump.
An older woman gossiped excitedly. A young man sneered.
Threatening suicide over a breakup? That's emotional blackmail. Can't people break up if they don't like each other anymore?
The young woman beside him frowned.
You can't say that. If he didn't like her, why did he get together with her in the first place? Why push someone to this point?
I looked through the crowd and immediately recognized the familiar figure standing at the front. After spending over 2,000 days and nights together, I could tell at a glance that it was Paul. Compared to the last time we met, he seemed much more haggard and thin. His white shirt billowed emptily in the wind. The building opposite was only 6 stories high, so we could clearly hear Mabel's angry shouting.
"Paul Booth, you're a bastard. I've given so much for you, and now that you're done playing, you want to leave?"
Her eyes bulged, looking terrifying.
"You wish."
Are you crazy?
Paul's expression was fierce, his eyes bloodshot.
I don't like you anymore. Can I not be with you?
"Liar."
Mabel was furious.
"Then why did you break up with that woman for me? Is that woman trying to seduce you again?"
Paul was almost breaking down.
Back then, I must have been out of my mind. I was blind, okay? If I had known you were like this, I would never have broken up with you, Dora.
This statement triggered Mabel, her features twisted like a demon.
"You want to dump me for that woman? Dream on. Paul Booth, if you treat me like this, I won't let you go even if I die."
Then go die. Just die already.
Paul completely lost it.
We've been together for a few months, and you've threatened to die hundreds of times. Just go die now, okay?
I stared blankly at Paul. He seemed like a madman, completely different from the confident man I once knew. What had he gone through in just a few months to change so drastically? Weren't they together because they loved each other? Mabel kept saying she would jump, but she didn't actually jump, just kept arguing with Paul. I had long seen through it. Mabel was very afraid of death. Every time she threatened Paul, it was just empty words. During our 7 years together, she had pulled stunts like this many times but never actually dared to die. They confronted each other like this for over an hour. Just when I thought it was going to end, an accident suddenly happened. Mabel probably stood for too long, her legs went numb, and she slipped.
Ah.
In everyone's shocked gaze, she screamed and fell. 2 seconds later, there was a dull thud. Mabel hit the ground hard. Oh my God! Help! Someone died. Call 911. The crowd instantly erupted. Paul was also stunned. After reacting, he staggered and scrambled over. The ambulance arrived quickly. Several medical staff lifted Mabel onto the stretcher, and the red lights flashed as they took her away. No one expected things to turn out like this. It took me a while to come back to my senses and follow my colleagues back. I rarely posted on social media, so my colleagues didn't know Paul was my ex-boyfriend. On the way back, they were still sighing.
"That guy is quite handsome. Why did he find such a woman? She's both ugly and crazy. What was he thinking?"
Another colleague chimed in.
"Maybe her family is rich. Then why did they break up? He couldn't stand her ugliness anymore. Did you see her face? Full of pimples and scars. If I had to eat at the same table with her, I'd lose my appetite. She just tried to jump off a building. Show some decency.
What happened later, I heard from my best friend. Mabel was lucky to survive. But she didn't get off easy. She injured her spine in the fall and became a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. Simply put, she was paralyzed. Paul covered her medical expenses and took care of her until she was discharged, but he couldn't take it anymore and wanted to break up with her. Unexpectedly, the Hart family wouldn't have it. A family that could raise such a daughter wasn't going to be reasonable. They insisted that Paul was responsible for their daughter's condition and demanded $3 million in compensation and that he take care of Mabel for the rest of her life by marrying her. Paul's family wasn't short of money. Although he hadn't asked his family for money since graduation, his parents couldn't ignore something like this. His parents' stance was that the $3 million compensation could be negotiated, but marriage was out of the question. Originally, Mabel had angered Paul's grandmother to death, and his parents hated her. There was no way they would let her into the family. Especially now that she was paralyzed, if they married, Paul's life would be ruined, and his parents would never agree to it. But the Hart family insisted that Paul take responsibility, or they would sue him and ruin his reputation, making his life miserable. The two families were at each other's throats.
I heard Paul is almost driven to a mental breakdown.
My best friend couldn't help but laugh.
A classmate visited him last time and said his eyes were blank, he hadn't shaved, and he looked completely out of it.
After hanging up the phone, I felt a mix of emotions. After all this time, I wasn't as heartbroken as I was right after the breakup. Later, I realized that what actually dulls everything isn't time but habit. When you're used to being with someone, breaking up feels like losing a part of yourself, unbearably painful. But slowly, as the wound heals, you get used to being alone, and it doesn't hurt as much anymore. It's really frightening, 7 years together, inseparable. Yet it only takes a few months to erase it all. When we first broke up, I was so angry that I wished Paul and Mabel would get their comeuppance, so they could feel my pain. But now that they're really unlucky, I don't feel any satisfaction. Just a sense of irony and the unpredictability of life. A few months ago, we were the closest people in the world, and I was happily preparing to marry him. Now, just 2 seasons later, everything has changed. When I got home that night, I saw someone squatting at my door. I was startled, and when I looked closer, I realized it was Paul. But he had changed so much that I almost didn't recognize him. In just a few days, he had gotten even thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, unshaven, looking like he had been drained of all energy. Hearing the noise, he turned his head blankly. Before he could speak, tears started falling from his red eyes. I felt a pang in my heart but kept a cold face and asked,
"What are you doing here?"
Paul's voice sounded like it had been ground with sandpaper, hoarse and rough.
Eudora,
His eyes were red.
if I say I regret it now, would it be too shameless?
I looked down at him.
It's good that you know.
But
He stiffly hugged his head with his arms and started sobbing.
I really regret it. I regret it so much. I had everything, so why did it have to turn out like this?
I had really loved him once, and his words brought tears to my eyes. But I held back and whispered,
This was your choice, wasn't it? I begged you once, but you still abandoned me for her.
Paul's voice was filled with pain, as if it was mixed with blood. I saw his hands gripping his head, turning pale, with veins bulging on the back of his hands.
She pursued me so relentlessly. At first I hated her, but somehow I started to feel a bit moved. She loved me with all her heart, and I began to feel sorry for her and couldn't help but respond. Later, I thought I liked her, but after being together, I realized I didn't. What I thought was love was just being moved, and that can't turn into love. After we got together, she seemed to change. She watched me closely, checked my phone every day, deleted all the women from my contacts, called my female colleagues to warn them to stay away from me, and scolded my male colleagues not to take me out.
He choked with emotion.
That's when I realized I didn't like her at all. I used to feel sorry for her, but gradually, I started to get irritated just looking at her face. I didn't even want to stay at home for a minute longer, and I'd sit in the car for a long time after work before I could muster the courage to go home.
It was like he had been holding it in for too long and didn't know who to talk to, and now he was breaking down, pouring it all out.
I wanted to break up, but she wouldn't let me. She always threatened me. But I never thought it would really turn out like this. I didn't want this either. What should I do?
He cried out, trembling, like a bough about to snap.
I regret it so much. I had everything. Why was I so foolish? If we hadn't broken up, we would probably be married by now. We were together for so long. I imagined so many times how you would look in a wedding dress.
He cried until he was hoarse. I thought I would be sad, but I only had one thought in my mind. He looked much more miserable than I did when I was heartbroken. Finally feeling it, aren't you? My pain. Paul didn't seem to need my response, he just couldn't hold it in anymore and needed someone to talk to. After a while, he looked up, his eyes swollen, with a hint of humble pleading and caution.
Eudora, can we?
No.
I coldly interrupted him.
What do you think I am? A garbage collector?
Paul's face turned pale instantly.
Move.
I said expressionlessly.
I want to go home. I gave you too many chances, but you chose Mabel every time. You made your choice, now you have to live with the consequences.
Paul was silent for a moment, then slowly stood up, leaning against the wall. He forced a bitter smile.
You're right. Saying this now, even I feel disgusted. But if I didn't ask, I'd never be at peace.
The motion sensor light in the hallway went out after a moment of silence, and the corridor was enveloped in darkness. Paul slowly walked down the stairs. When he reached the last step, he turned around, with the endless night behind him.
Eudora,
He said.
I'm a bastard, and now I'm getting what I deserve. But you're a good person.
His voice was tinged with crying.
Don't be sad because of me. You'll meet someone 1,000 times, 10,000 times better than me.
With that, he turned and left. I watched his back for a long time, speechless. After that, I never heard from Paul again. I didn't know if he left with Mabel or what happened to him. I didn't care anymore. I gradually moved on, and when I looked back on those days, I mostly felt a sense of nostalgia. The past 7 years felt like a dream. The first half was sweet, but the second half was unbearably bitter. But no matter what, now the dream is over. And I should continue moving forward. Placing a bouquet of lilies in front of Grandma's grave, I stood up and softly said,
Grandma, I'm doing well now, you can be at ease.
The cemetery was quiet, with only the sound of the wind swirling past my ears. The deep winter had passed, and the winter jasmine around the cemetery was already impatiently sprouting new buds. I tightened my coat and walked out. Winter had passed. Spring was coming.